Well, good morning. Thank you all for being here and for braving the cold weather. For those of you who I don't know, I am Matt Cardoza. I have the pleasure of now being Communications Director at the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education. This is the 12th Annual Media Symposium. And I was thinking through this, and I think I've been to all 12 of them. Obviously, this is my first time being at the Media Symposium on this side. And it's been a long day coming, and it's gotten here very quickly. It's been fun to plan, and we've tried to plan a day for you because this is specifically meant for you as the media so that we can present topics that we think are going to be important topics. They're going to be coming up in this next calendar year and also in the legislative session to come. Before I go over a few things in the packet, though, I want to bring up Taya Ryan, who's the president and CEO of Georgia Public Broadcasting, and they are such gracious hosts to allow us to use this great facility each year. So, Taya, come on up, please.
Thanks, Matt. It's an easy choice to host all of you here today because it represents and is part of our commitment to education. You know, many of you think of us as a public media company. Maybe that's radio and television in your mind, but the truth is maybe the bigger division in this company is education. We have an enormous commitment, particularly to digital education, and that's not just talking about it, that's actually producing materials. We have two folks who spend their time traveling around the state teaching teachers how to use digital education. Since this beginning of this school year, so just so you know our commitment to education, we have made 70 school trainings just this school year and reached 1,500 Georgia educators. That's a lot of people in just the first part of the year. I think many of you know about our digital studies, digital textbook, and our field trips. From the school year to now, 750,000 times it was accessed. This is a lot of impact that we have. We've made an enormous commitment to it. The exciting part is that we're being recognized now at GPB as producers of educational material. The DOE asked us to create a civil rights virtual learning journey. If you want to see all of this, please just go to gpb.org education, and you will see the kind of materials that we're producing. We're particularly proud of the civil rights journey. It is a digital field trip into the history of civil rights. We're very proud of it. This past year, we launched our chemistry series. It is a gazillion hours of chemistry, which was painful. It made me realize that I love being my age for the first time because I don't have to do chemistry again. But we hear from those that do love chemistry that it's doing very well, and we are about to launch our physics series. Now, these aren't just nice things to watch. These are entire to standards courses. So in different parts of the state, if there are not physics or chemistry teachers, they can use this series and literally, for those students that want to take chemistry and physics, do so. They are some of the most popular downloads we have on our entire website, not just our education site, but on our entire website. And we did something really exciting last year that we had no idea it would be so successful, which was the live exploration at Gray's Reef. That was a live teaching moment where we were down at the coast talking to the biologists and broadcasting the live event throughout classrooms throughout the state. Laura, we were happy if maybe 5,000 kids watched, right? Right. Well, it's close to 50,000. Absolutely knocked our socks off. In fact, the furthest one to, was it Croatia? Where was it? Romania. We had a Romanian classroom watch. So it's the joy of digital education. So We are with you in this incredible journey we're all taking to educate our kids here in Georgia. We stand ready to serve. We're about to launch a new series called Gosha Go, which is a new math game. We are really going to focus this next year on the preschool to third grade and make most of our materials for those folks. And what the teachers told us in the state, they really, really wanted early childhood education in math to Georgia standards, and that's the key. So I welcome all of you to GPB and the team here. We have worked with Steve and the team for years and have enormous respect. You're going to learn a lot today, so enjoy and welcome to GPB. Thank you so much.
All right, well, let's dive in. One thing, I hope you all got a packet, so let's make sure, let's start there. You got the red packet, right? So I want to go over a couple of things in that so that you know what the day looks like. I know I sent that to y'all ahead of time, so you have a general idea of that. But you're going to hear some great speakers, some topics that we think are going to be hot issues this year, some speakers that are new, some you've heard before. But I'm not going to go through the entire agenda. You can walk through that. Same with the bios. We're going to do quick intros as the speakers come up, but the full bios of all the speakers and the panel that we're going to have in the afternoon, where we're talking about some of the equity and polling data, you can read through those as well and who those panelists are and then who our morning speakers are. The press release is, there's a printed copy for you here in the packet. We always try to give you all the exclusive of this, so there's the copies of the actual top 10 that I know you picked up on your way in. So we won't be sending that out until a little later on, but you've got the press release here if you need any particular information from it or quotes. There's a quote in there. And this year, I tried to do something a little bit different, and by the way, Bill sends his regards, and he wishes he could be here, and he misses this. And I know you all had such a great time working with him for so many years, but when I ran this idea by him, he was like, that's a great idea, is that we tried to put this down into a one-pager per topic, not one-pager overall. But so the top 10, so you've got your full book, and if you want to really dig in deep, in which we hope you will and encourage you to do so, you can do that. But we have a one-pager for each of the 10 topics that will give you a little bit of a flavor of what that topic's about and what we think just the big picture about that particular issue is. So you'll find those, you should have received those when you came in as well. Very importantly is an evaluation form. One of the things that, I'm hitting things up here. One of the things that we do is we try to take your feedback. And without your feedback, we're putting together a program that we think is valuable, but we want to make sure it's valuable to you. And as the partnership, we serve as a nonpartisan resource for you. We want to be able to give you information from a nonpartisan view. But we need to know from you what it is that you care to hear about. And we're going to keep on doing these symposiums as long as you say that they're valuable. So please take a moment to fill out that evaluation after it's over and leave those with us, because that's how we can make this program better for you each year. And finally, one thing that you're gonna see in your packet is separate from the top 10, but this year you'll notice that it's the first of the top 10, and that's called EdQuest Georgia. And the partnership has been working, probably Dana and team would say, for years on this project to get EdQuest Georgia together. And it's really a policy framework of education of things that through research we have looked at to see what's working, what's not working so well, and what's okay but needs to be done a little more or a little bit less. And so we look at that and we tried to simplify that by doing red, yellow, green, something that you can really understand. So I'd encourage you to dive into those. We hope that even through during these gubernatorial, with the gubernatorial candidates and the candidates for other offices, that we can have this as something that they look to see what needs to be improved in education, what's going well. Leave it alone if it's already going well, and don't mess with it. So, so those are all the things in your packet. As I mentioned, the press release will be sent out electronically a little later on today. As far as interviews go today, I know that you all are going to want to interview people who are speaking. One, I would encourage you to ask questions throughout, even when they are speaking. If it's appropriate time, go ahead and ask your questions then. This is a dialogue, even though they're up here speaking. But if you need to capture someone and do an interview with them, stand alone, if we could ask you to please do those outside so that those who were speaking at the time, that it's not interrupting that would be perfectly fine. I know in years past, we've always done plenty of those out there in the hallway. So we appreciate you doing that. The slides are going to be made available. So all of what you see today will be made available after the day is over. I will send out a follow-up to all of you. So you will get those, as well as this is being recorded today. So if you miss something and you want to see it, what was said about it, you will be able to see that recording. Quick housekeeping. There are refreshments through these doors back here. So if you need to get a drink, water, whatever, they're through there. And the restrooms are right through the back here. We have breaks, a couple of breaks throughout the day for that. But if you need to slip out and back, they're right across the hall there. I want to acknowledge a few people who are here who are not with the media, but that you, as media, probably deal with. You may not have met before face-to-face. So I'm just going to alphabetically call them, and they may not be here yet, or they may be coming throughout the day. But Autumn Blanchard with the Southern Education Foundation. There's Autumn. Robert Gaines from Georgia Leadership Institute. I actually know Robert could not make it this morning. He just called. Reg Griffin and Liz Young from Bright from the Start, DECAL. John McCosh from the Georgia Budget Policy Institute. I don't know if John was able to make it just yet. Bridget Johnson with the Georgia School Boards Association, and y'all know Justin Pauley probably. He's enjoying a vacation right now, so he couldn't make it. But Allison Tower from the Technical College System of Georgia in the back there. And Ken Zeff from Learn for Life. Ken is here. So thank you for being here, Ken. And finally, before I bring Dana Rickman up to get us started with the top 10, I want to acknowledge our own staff. Dr. Steve Dolinger, our president, is right outside the door there. Miss Diane Hopkins in the back here, our vice president. Miss Alice Ford, our administrative assistant, who is also right out there, and you were greeted by her when you registered. Dr. Dana Rickman, our Director of Policy and Research. Many of you have probably talked to her through the years. Ms. Caitlin Doherty Kokinas, Project Associate, and worked very closely with Top 10 and Ed Quest that I mentioned earlier. Ms. Merrill Wilcox, she is the newest staff member. I've been here 2 weeks longer than Merrill has, so I feel I'm a veteran to Merrill. And finally, Teresa Brower, who is in charge of fundraising efforts for the Georgia Partnership. So without further ado, to keep us on track, I am going to introduce and have Dr. Dana Rickman come up and present what we're here for today, and that is to talk about the 2018 Top 10 Issues to Watch. Dana?
Thank you, Matt, and good morning, everybody. Am I the appropriate length from the microphone? We're good? I heard people talking earlier about Anyway, good morning. Welcome. I'm so excited to be here this morning with all of you and bring to you the top 10 issues to watch in 2018. It's always a really big day for me. I consider this one of my big responsibilities at the partnership is to produce this and release it out into the world to see how it does. And so it's always fun to talk to you all and see how it's being received. Matt, thank you, and I appreciate you highlighting the rest of the partnership. I just said that this is one of my big responsibilities within the partnership, but I certainly don't do it alone. And so I want to acknowledge everybody at the partnership who helps put this together with lots of editing and proofing and helpful suggestions and comments. And are you crazy you wrote that? No. Kind of discussions, but also this year in particular, Caitlin Daugherty, Coquinas, and Meryl Wilcox helped research and write a lot of these issues as well. And so it really is a partnership product. And so I wanted to just give a shout out to them in the great work that they all do. And so let's jump right in. But before we jump in, I just want to take a minute and give, for those of you who are new, sort of a background to the top 10. This is our 14th annual publication, and it's a list of critical issues that really, they're very research-based and sort of a nonpartisan analysis of what we think are going to be what people are talking about in the coming year. And so we've start planning next year's issue pretty much right away. We keep an eye on national research, we keep an eye on Georgia research, like what do we think the legislator is going to be talking about? Are there any bills left over from last year that may come back? Are there any policies that are going to be rolled out throughout the year? Things of that nature is kind of how we go about selecting the issues. But also, too, there's always one or two issues in here that we feel actually are big topics that really are affecting student outcomes, but no one's really talking about them. And so we want to shine a light and lift up some things that are going on. And so that's kind of how we get at the top 10 each year. And so the big reveal that you have it in front of you. The first issue, as Matt mentioned, is EdQuest Georgia, Charting Educational Reform. Over the past probably 2 years, the partnership has worked really hard to create a framework that are based on policies that other high-performing systems all have in common. And the reason we made it the first issue this year is that it provides an outline of sorts for the subsequent 9 issues that you're going to read about, and really helps put them into a broader context. It helps sort of highlight how they're all interrelated. I've been writing on the top 10 for many years now, and one thing I've been reflecting on recently is that I don't know if it's just the way I've been thinking about this or I know more than I used to, but it seems to me education policy is becoming a lot more complicated and a lot more interrelated with a lot of different things. And while we list out 10 issues, it would be a mistake to think that they were 10 discrete issues. They're all incredibly interrelated and affect each other in a lot of complicated ways. And so I think that the EdQuest framework really helps people understand where a particular piece of an issue fits into this broader framework and affects the whole. And so that's why we set that up that way. And I won't take as much time on all 10 of these as we go. Number 2 is equity and fairness, the opportunity to succeed. Top-performing school systems have made really explicit decisions about how to ensure all students are educated to really high standards and that all schools have the resources necessary to get those students to those standards. We're going to have a panel later this afternoon that really looks at this equity question in Georgia and across the Southeast, so you'll get more details there. The early learning workforce, a challenge for Georgia. One of the great news that we've been celebrating all year is that this is the Georgia Pre-K program's 25th anniversary. And I think that we can all agree that the Georgia Pre-K program is a bright, shining star, and we're a national leader in early learning around our pre-K program. And so what we wanted to do with this issue is really take a look at one of the strengths of Georgia Pre-K is over the past 25 years, they have really professionalized the workforce, the teachers within the program providing instruction for early learning. What are some lessons that we can learn from the Georgia Pre-K program and apply them to the rest of the early care industry, talking about the infant, toddler, preschool? How do we get that level of quality across the entire industry within Georgia? So that's what that issue looks at. The fourth issue, teachers, leadership from the classroom. Once I go through these 10, I'm going to take a deeper dive into 2 of them, and this is one of them, and really looking at, we've been facing challenges and talking a lot about recruitment and retention, and teacher leadership within the classroom is a way to get at that, and I'll go into that in more detail in a minute. The missing 20%, increasing Georgia's high school graduation rate. One thing I think everybody was really excited about this last year's graduation rate, we topped 80%, which is a really great milestone, and we're slowly moving in the right direction in terms of getting all of our kids graduating from high school ready for that next step of college and career. However, we have this now 20% who are not graduating on time, and so this issue really, this is one where we want to sort of shine a light and raise up who are these students? And we think a lot of them are really associated with really hard to serve students, students with interrupted educations, long-term medical problems that keep them out of school, students in juvenile justice, students in foster care. These are hard to serve students. How is Georgia looking at them, and how are we going to make sure that they also graduate high school? Georgia's talent gap. Time to close it. We've been talking about the talent gap a lot over the past couple of years, us and a lot of other people, where I think we all know the statistics now that there are a lot of job opportunities in Georgia. The economy is growing, but compared to other states, we have a relatively high unemployment rate. There's a mismatch between the skills that employers want and the skills that our general population has. So what is Georgia doing to close that gap? Literacy, a foundational necessity. Language development is the foundation for social, emotional, mental health development, all of which really affects a student's ability to learn. Georgia's been doing a lot around grade level reading and third grade literacy. We have the Get Georgia Reading campaign, but we're also looking at what are we doing for adult literacy. And so this issue really dives into this whole question of literacy and what does it mean for Georgia as a state. Student health. A pathway to classroom success. It seems like an obvious statement that research has really highlighted the direct link between student outcomes and all aspects of student health. And I mean all aspects. I'm talking about physical health, but also vision, hearing, oral health, mental health. All of these things have a direct impact on students' ability to learn and our students' ability to succeed. So this issue takes a deeper dive into what Georgia's doing around each of those issues. Issue 9, rural Georgia. It matters a lot. This is the second issue that I'm going to go into detail in just a moment. I know a lot of you have been writing about rural Georgia recently, and so we've picked up on that as well, and so we're going to talk about that. And the 10th issue, an oldie but a goodie, the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA. What's next? I'm actually kind of excited to see what's next for Georgia in ESSA. It's the new plan that has been submitted to the feds that's replacing No Child Left Behind. We're still waiting for final approval from the federal government, but it'd be interesting to see what implementation looks like over the next year. So those are our 10. Before we do a deeper dive, and those of you who know me know I was trained as an econometrician and I love data. And so instead of throwing a ton of data at you, which makes me nervous not to talk about data, I did a nice little summary. If you look at pages II and III, this looks at indicators of child well-being, educational attainment, and workforce readiness. We've been tracking these indicators in the top 10 since we've started to kind of see how we're trending. And we think that as we address each of the top issues every year, these indicators will get better. And so there's some good news on this slide. And what I've done here, instead of throwing up all of these different indicators, so I'm sort of summarized them in my advanced coding scheme. Yellow means that on average, we're holding steady. Little blips up, little blips down, but average, that slope line is pretty flat. Green means that we're moving in the right direction. The lighter green means we're moving in the right direction with a little less gusto than the darker green, where we're really, moving forward. And like I said, this is a relatively good news slide. I think for those of you who have been with us for a couple of years, remember there used to be a lot of red on this slide, where the indicators were really going the wrong way. So we as a state, have stopped the backsliding on these key issues, and so that's good news. More good news is that even in the ones that are yellow, we are still above the national average in a good way. So things like enrollment in early childhood education, we're higher than the national average. Students earning AP credit, we're generally higher than the national average. I think this past year we were directly tied with that. But especially our minority students and our low-income students tend to do much better than the national average in terms of earning AP credit. So that's good news. Where we have some disturbing news, and we have for a while, we're still below the national average in things like low birth weight babies. Children in poverty has always been an issue for us, always been a challenge for us. 4th grade reading we've dropped recently, and 8th grade math as well. And so those are areas why we're sort of flat and we've stopped going backwards. There's still movement that we really need to go forward. And I know I might be talking a little fast, so if you guys have questions as we go, feel free to just... All right. So I want to take just a few minutes and dive deeper into 2 of the issues, because many of our speakers this afternoon will cover a lot of the others. And so again, feel free to ask questions as we go. But the first one I really wanted to look at and highlight was this concept of teacher leadership. This is issue 4, about page 23 in your book. This is not a new concept, but it's gotten a lot of new traction over the past couple of years. And you've got some definitions there on the left-hand side of what teacher leadership actually is, and kind of a quote here on why it's suddenly important. But historically, when you think about the education profession and you think about a career ladder, how am I going to advance my career? What's my next step? Traditionally, that tended to mean taking teachers out of the classroom, right? They become an assistant principal, then a specialist at the district office. And with that kind of career pathway, it really would encourage some of our best and brightest teachers to leave the classroom. And that was kind of a disturbing trend. And when teachers are surveyed, a national survey recently found that really most teachers, almost 70% of them, are really not interested in becoming a principal. They love the classroom. They love being in front of students. They love the teaching aspect of it. But without a career pathway, like, what am I going to do next kind of thing? And we're always sort of thinking about, even for ourselves, what does my career trajectory look like? But over a quarter of teachers surveyed said that they were very interested or extremely interested in some sort of hybrid role that would allow them to both continue teaching but also lead education reforms from inside the classroom. And that's a lot of what we're talking about in terms of this idea about teacher leadership. And so to really encourage teacher leadership and support it as either at the state level or district level, is we need purposeful pathways to teacher leadership, which again are different than what we think of the traditional leadership pathways of professional development that would take you the principal route. So we're talking about 2 different routes of leadership and professional development. If that makes sense, I'm gonna make sure I didn't lose anybody in that.
Dr., I just do have a question.
Yeah.
Nowhere here did you mention the master teacher certification program. Do you not find that as significant? I know Georgia no longer supports that from a financial standpoint, but what is your view?
That was replaced by, we have a version of that now. It's called something different.
Okay.
And it is check with Professional Standards Commission. But I think it was replaced with, I'll get to that in a second. But yes. We have a version. It is still very important, and we have a version of it now, and I think they actually sort of beefed it up a little bit. She was asking about the master teacher certification. And so now we have a lead professional certificate that really allows teachers to coach and mentor new teachers and specific training about how to really raise up instructional practices within the classroom for other teachers that are wanting to learn and things of that nature.
Is it a national program or just a state program?
I don't know.
Dr. Oakman?
Yes.
Do you cite that survey you mentioned?
Yeah, it's the MetLife survey. Somewhere on page 23, you should see it was a MetLife survey of teachers. Yes, Maureen?
Do you want to ask questions now about this or wait?
Go ahead.
Okay, my question simply is that, I hear this a lot about teacher leaders, but then I have teachers who, when I ask, raw days request teachers, what's the ideal holiday gift for the student? They are paranoid, some of them, to have their name in the media without clearing it with their principals. And some of the strongest teachers I've met in Georgia, they actually, I feel, pay a price for that. when they start speaking out, they simply, I just don't believe this. I don't believe that they want teachers to take a foremost role, because so many of them, I know Fulton, for example, I think they're very hard on teachers who speak out. And I've lost some great teacher writers who feel like they can't do essays on general issues because of the blowback from the administration. So do you really believe that they want teacher leaders, or do they want a narrow definition of teacher leader that suits them?
Well, it depends on who you mean by they, right? So, and I think I want to get to your question about sort of the opportunities in principal leadership. I think Georgia right now is setting itself up to have, and they're deliberately setting themselves up to have exactly that discussion. What do we want from teacher leaders? How would that look? How do we support them? And this is still a relatively new area for Georgia. And so I'm going to get back to your question, and if I don't answer it after this slide, raise your hand again. And so as we move forward, one of the reasons the couple reasons to focus on teacher leadership, one, it helps keep high quality teachers in the classroom. It helps increase retention. Retention and recruitment is a big problem, and it helps teachers feel a lot more the professionalization of the field. I have a clear pathway, I have additional responsibilities, there could be a pay bump associated with that. And Georgia, especially under the Professional Standards Commission, has put in a lot of different career pathway opportunities. It's very complicated and it's technical in there, but just as an example, Georgia is the only state with a specific certification in leadership for teachers. There's an advanced degree program in teacher leadership. There are different endorsements that teachers can get as a teacher leader endorsement or a coaching endorsement. All of these are in addition to their regular certification that would allow more responsibilities, more activities. Yes, ma'am?
Would that only apply in the state of Georgia?
Yeah, these are just for Georgia teachers, because it's the Georgia Professional Standards Commission that is doing this. And also, as previously mentioned, the lead professional certificate, which is certified teachers, have them special training to coach and mentor new teachers, but also any teacher who's striving to improve their instructional practices. And so how do you design a good evaluation? How do you use data to inform teaching? All of these kinds of things, they get specific professional development around how to do that. It's also essential for turnaround schools. We'll have the new CTO coming to talk to us, but really to turn around a struggling school, you need leadership emitting from all levels of a school, the principal and the classroom teachers. Also, it takes about 5 to 7 years on average to really successfully turn around a school and have it hold. And so you need a stable cadre of staff in that school to keep any new reforms going. And so if you have a good stable of teacher leaders, you get stability, you get high quality. These things are really important for turnarounds. So under opportunities, and this may get at Maureen's question a little bit, we've had a lot of conversations, and we just had a recent study commission around principal leadership. And so one of the things that we see in Georgia is that principals aren't typically trained on what to do with teacher leaders, right? Like, what do I do with this now leader coach? How do I match a good mentor to a new teacher coming in? Do I just do, Old Faithful here who's always done my mentoring? Is that the right teacher? Principals need specific training around how to utilize the teacher leaders in their school. And what does that look like? And they need to be able to provide training, support, and utilize them in the right way that plays to their right strengths. And right now, that's not a common thing that's happening. You get a really good principal that knows these things, they can be very successful at it. A new principal or someone who hasn't been trained around this, so it's very uneven in the state. Also, the Professional Standards Commission and the Georgia Department of Education is going to be pulling together a study committee throughout 2018 to really sort of answer the question that Maureen posed about what does teacher leadership look like in Georgia? What are the elements that we're looking for from teacher leaders? What are we looking to get out of them? Those recommendations, hopefully by the end of 2018, we need to incorporate into any professional development that we're doing for principals about how to appropriately use teacher leaders. Yes?
Just top of mind, where are some schools that are doing this well already in the state?
I'll have to get back to you on that. I'm sure there are some. But I will let you know. Matt, write that down. So that's teacher leaders. Any other questions about that one? Yes?
It sounds as though this is an aspiration rather than something that you think is currently happening. What kind of time frame?
Well,
do you think it takes to do that?
all of the career ladders are already in place, and Professional Standards Commission has been working for a couple of years to get, so all of the endorsements, the certifications, all of those are there, and teachers have been taking advantage of them for a while. The aspiration is to how do we fully utilize all of that so we don't have the problem like Maureen was talking about, that district leaders and principal leaders either don't know what to do with them or don't understand what it is, aren't on board with it. So it's really a shared, it's a cultural shift for a lot of people in terms of a sort of a shared leadership responsibility within a school and within a district. That could take a while. But I think having the discussion and raising it up and putting a spotlight on, we really need to rethink how we're doing this is the first step.
I would add to her that it's a statewide problem. It's
Yes.
in rural systems and not urban systems, maybe even more so. Principals tend to be dictators as opposed to collaborative people.
It depends on the principal. I'm sure you have examples of both everywhere.
I have multiple examples
Yeah.
of dictators.
Any other questions about teacher leaders? Yes.
Well, I know in 2015, there was the Georgia survey on retention
Yes.
of teachers. Have they been resurveyed? I know it's only a year later, but have they done anything with those results? And is it kind of tied into this?
I don't know what you mean by they. I don't think they have been resurveyed, but I do think they took the results very seriously, especially when looking, when Governor Deal brought together the teacher commission to look at the recommendations from the ERC. A lot of the information from that really went into the recommendation around how do we professionalize the profession, right? The respect for teachers and the professionalization. And so a lot of the discussion about part of that professionalization is really how do we build up this career ladder for teachers so they feel that they have a clear career ladder, they can stay in the classroom, and that helps for the professionalization part. And that was a big recommendation coming out of the teacher commission on the Education Reform Commission recommendations. All right, next. Rural. It matters a lot. I don't know if you've heard, but it does. The maps that I put up here, they're in your book. It's figure 9.3 on page 61. These were produced by the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, where they were looking at economic development in Georgia. This first map, the one closest to me, was looking at growth, minimal growth, and then loss between 2010 and 2015, so the last 5 years. And I will say that hub tends to be non-metro Atlanta, relatively urban areas, so places like Columbus, Augusta, where they have some job central areas, and then you have rural. And we've been hearing a lot recently about the economic growth of Georgia, and that we're pretty robust. And if you look at Georgia versus the national average, we've outpaced the U.S. average in economic growth over the past 5 years, and we're predicted in the next 10 years, the chart furthest away, to still outpace the rest of the country, which is really great news. The really bad news, though, is that this is not a trend that is shared by the whole state. Most of that growth, almost all of it, is being driven by Metro Atlanta. And you can see the difference, especially in the loss of economic activity, which is sort of the light gray color. You have many more counties that are going to experience economic loss over the next 10 years than did over the past 5, and almost all of them are in rural areas. And so we're really, and as we get that much of our state that is experiencing economic loss, that's a problem for the entire state. And it's unclear how we would maintain our robust economic growth as an entire state when we have these kinds of shifts at work. And so that's one of the reasons why rural matters. This next slide is, I think, table 9.1, which you find on page 63 of your book. Why this matters for education. Over a third of Georgia schools are classified as rural. Georgia has the third largest rural population in the nation of school children. Third largest in the nation. They're a big part of our state and our society. And the graphic here, this is from a report entitled Why Rural Matters, came out last year. It was published by the Rural School and Community Trust, a national nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank. And you see here this rank. They did a priority ranking. And the priority ranking is greatest need based on a number of factors such as poverty, student achievement, state resources, etc. The overall priority, and closer to 1 is the greatest need, so 1 is bad, right? The overall ranking for Georgia was 6. For rural Georgia is the 6th most priority ranked in the entire nation. And here you see some of the specific indicators that went into the overall ranking, and you can see where we rank amongst specific indicators. For overall academic level priority, we were 12th in the nation, again, closer to 1 is bad. Overall college readiness priority, we were 9th. And then when you factor in all the other things around poverty and state resources and whatnot, that gets us to 6 as our priority. This is a significant problem for Georgia, and it's an urgent problem. And this is an example of, I talked earlier about how all of these issues kind of bleed together. And so we talk about things like access to health care has a direct impact on these numbers. For example, and I'm going to throw a lot of numbers out here for you, but just sort of bear with me for a second. More than 40 counties in Georgia, almost all rural, do not have OB/GYN services. Out of 180 hospitals across the state, only 75 have labor and delivery services. Why does that matter? Well, without prenatal care, a woman is more than 7 times more likely to have a premature birth. 7 times more likely to have premature birth, and that's anything 37 weeks or below. Why does that matter? A child born premature, 19% higher risk increase for suspension in kindergarten, 36% increase in developmental delays. These directly impact student outcomes. And so you have a county that does not have OB/GYN services, has a higher than average proportion of preterm births. They're going to have a higher than average proportion of students with developmental delays. That's a stress on a school system. See how all these things kind of meld together. The good news is that Georgia is really getting serious and really purposeful about doing something about some of these disparities in rural Georgia versus the rest of the state. There's a couple different initiatives going on right now. We've taken the past year to study the issue, and I'm gratified to see that we're hopefully in 2018 we'll actually move from studying the problem to hopefully addressing the problem. Most recently was the House Representatives Rural Development Council. Many of you have been writing and reporting on this. They had a series of recommendations that they've published that they feel some legislation we're going to see in 2018. What I've put up here are literally I cut and paste the bulleted recommendations from the education section. So you can see those here. I was also gratified to see that other areas that they're going to address or hopefully address that again affect education, broadband access, so things like telehealth and virtual learning, that will help with that. Also, there are some recommendations around health and health access, primarily with the workforce, and so that we can get more doctors and social workers and even, emergency medical people into these rural areas. And so there's a whole series of recommendations around that we're looking to see which ones are going to get picked up on, which ones might be acted upon. Also, the Georgia Chamber of Commerce has established a Center for Rural Prosperity down in Tifton, and their goal is to bring business, nonprofit, government, education, private sector leaders together to really address the challenges of local communities, but to do it within the local communities, because each community's challenges are going to be slightly different, and therefore each solution to those challenges are going to be different. So they really want to dig deep into what's going on locally and rural to help spur the economic engine there, which then of course would have benefits for the education. That's my spiel. I have time for a question. Matt nervously says yes. I can take a question on any of these or something else before I get the hook. And I'll be around all day if you have other questions you want to follow up. Yes?
So are the numbers in rank a priority that you're on?
Oh, I meant to say that to me, there's really no, they're all a high priority to me.
This is a kind of just basic. What is the working definition of a rural community?
That's a good question. And we actually struggled with that. According to the census, it's really one of exclusion, where you have an urban center and then you have sort of suburban centers, and it's based on population. And if it's not one of those, it's rural. And so that tends to be, it's based on population, and it's usually rural as if you don't have enough people to qualify for one of the others. And we have it in the book. Alan, do you have a definition of rural? I should introduce Alan Richard, who you'll see later on our panel, that he actually worked on the Rural Matters report. There's multiple ones.
Yes, there's different census definitions, and there are different definitions for rural school districts, rural schools, and rural students, because you may have a student that's from a more rural area attending school in a more populated area, or kids from a more populated area going to a more rural school, depending on its zip code maybe. So it's a very confusing set of definitions, but hopefully in your citations and in the Why Rural Matters report, which is online, you can easily see some of those definitions.
Not to be evasive, but it's sort of you sort of know it when you see it. You're just like, oh, I saw.
I just wonder if it was tied to resources, because you can have very rural communities that are very high wealth.
No, for our definitions here, it's strictly based on population. Okay. I'm gonna hand it back over to Matt, and I'll be around if you guys have more questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dana. Now it's my pleasure to ask Dr. Eric Thomas to come forward. Dr. Thomas probably needs no introduction, even though he hasn't been in Georgia all that long. He's our new Chief Turnaround Officer. As I mentioned earlier, you can read all about it in bios, but we had a moment to spend with him at lunch one day a few weeks ago. What a pleasure that was, and really excited to see what he does with this new area of turnaround schools. So, Dr. Thomas, thank you.
And tremendous thanks to everyone. Not only an opportunity to meet many people that I have unfortunately only met by email or phone so far. So the opportunity to meet a few people face to face, I really do appreciate that. And an opportunity to share some of the work that we are sort of launching and attempting to launch. So thank you, Matt, for the invitation to share and be a part of this absolutely fantastic day. There are a couple of things that Dana spoke about that really resonated. And there are three things that, as we think about the work that we're doing around this turnaround work, I mean, they're just really very much aligned. When you start talking about really changing outcomes for students, you know, there is a body of research that speaks to some of the things that needs to take place. So many of the things that Dana spoke about really sort of resonated, and it's very much aligned to some of the work that we're doing. She spoke about teacher leaders, and there was a little conversation around teacher leaders and their role. Again, you know, I'm coming from a university, so this idea of teacher leadership, there's a great deal of research. If you want to change an organization, you really have to have the voice and the input from the individuals who actually have to input the change. So if you want to transform a school, you know, it's the teachers who are going to engage with students. The research really supports the idea of ensuring that teachers have a very strong voice at the table. There was a conversation around ESSA and what's next. A part of what's next is this whole Chief Turnaround Officer concept. So that's a part of what's going on next. And then the EdQuest Georgia framework. You know, some of the variables that really were outlined that Dana shared, again, very much aligned with some of the work that we're going to be doing. So I think you'll see some of those very synergistic sort of pieces coming along. She talked about reform, literacy, equity, leadership, rural Georgia. Again, you just had that conversation. The 5 districts that we chose to work with first are all from rural Georgia. And that was not by happenstance. That was very much intentional and very strategic. Talked about health and non-academic variables. I think over the past 10 or 12 years, there was such an incredible focus on test scores, an incredible focus on what is taking place in the classroom. And as a teacher by trade, I very much appreciate curriculum, instruction, assessment, intervention, data analysis, absolutely stamp it, absolutely there. Also recognize that there are many kids who walk into the classroom and they're not ready to learn. And there are some external factors that we at least have to address if we want to see kids really rise to something special. And then the last thing from the EdQuest framework, with this idea about the talent gap. You'll see, in my mind, this is really not just about raising test scores. It's really not just about turning around a school. It's really changing the lives of kids, which then has an opportunity to change the lives of families and communities. And when we look at how we change the lives of families and communities from a statewide standpoint, some of the data that Dana spoke about from a state standpoint around economic development, the workforce, you can start seeing that not just in the Atlanta metro area, but I think you can start seeing that really throughout the state. So again, all of this work is very much aligned. What I'd like to do is take literally about 10 minutes. Quite honestly, I'm going to walk through this really fast, and then really just open up for some questions and some clarifications. So if you'll simply indulge with me for about 10 minutes, we'll sort of move forward. Again, Dana spoke about this really sort of the gap between qualified employees and what the workforce needs. And the research really argues that over the next 5 to 10 years, unless states and really as a nation, unless we do something a little bit different, there's going to be a growing gap. Here's the jobs that are available, and our workforce isn't prepared, qualified to fill those jobs. Again, that's not just a Georgia challenge, it's a state challenge, it's a national challenge. But obviously it's something that I think we have to keep our eyes on. That's one of the reasons we're doing the work. A second reason we're doing this work, for me, I think we're obligated to do the work. No matter where you sit on sort of the political spectrum, for one reason or another, whether it's economic development or because it's really about saving kids' lives, this work is absolutely important. So this idea of a moral imperative, a moral obligation, sometimes I like to joke around, we're going to pay for kids one way or the other. So we can pay for them on the front end, or we can pay for them on the back end, but we're going to pay for them sooner or later. I think this is such an incredible piece. As I've went around and talked to schools and school districts and superintendents and boards of ed, one of the things I've really tried to help them appreciate the difference between the little T and the big T. And what that means is turnaround. Under No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, school improvement grants, when all of those pieces came out several years ago, there was an incredible focus on this idea of turnaround. Just make sure I got that on there. There was an incredible focus on this idea of turnaround. And turnaround most of the time was associated with removing the principal and replacing 50% of the teaching staff. The work that we're doing, that's not our version of turnaround. So we've kind of got the little T in turnaround, not the big T of turnaround, sort of the federal definition that most people are really familiar with. This work is way too hard to do it alone. The conversation earlier about involving stakeholders, about involving community members, it absolutely takes sort of an all hands on deck approach. It really does take everyone involved. That's the superintendent, that's the senior cabinet, that's the school board, that's parents, that's community stakeholders, that's industry, that's higher ed. Literally, all hands need to be on deck. And if we think about the challenge, if it was a simple challenge, me and one individual from the room could probably spend a couple days and we'd come up with a nice solution to this problem if the problem was really small. You go to any state in the union and this idea of low-performing schools and some sort of achievement gap exists. And we haven't figured it out in this great country that we have because the problem is really difficult. To do that, we believe you got to bring everybody to the table. Everyone has to play a role. Consequently, it's really about a partnership. And that's really the word that I have attempted to use in every conversation. It really is bringing everybody to the table. If you care about students, if you care about your community, if you care about your state, you have a role to play in changing the outcomes for students. We need everyone to be partners in this work. In regards to sort of the strategy, obviously there is a body of research around turnaround. Dana spoke about sort of the 5 to 7 year process to sustain turnaround. When I talk to superintendents and school boards, and there's some belief that in 6 months we're going to turn around 100 schools. Well, that's not going to happen. This is going to be a process. But I think what we can do is begin to lay the foundation to see progress moving forward. To do that, again, this idea of partnerships and stakeholder engagement. We need everybody at the table. this idea of academic variables and non-academic variables. So this is not simply about teaching and learning. That's a huge piece of it. But it can't simply be about what teachers are doing or not doing, what the principal's doing or not doing. This really has to be about some of the health concerns, some of the vision concerns, some of the mental health concerns, homelessness, foster care, all of the things that kids, unfortunately, bring to the schoolhouse. If we only focus on the teaching and learning pieces, what the research argues is that we can get a bump. You could go from 25% proficiency to 32% proficiency. You could go from 48% proficient to 55% proficient if it's nothing but sort of the academic side. But the research argues if you really want to see kids move from here and have great opportunities in life, you've got to address their non-academic variables, and that's really important. When I was given the opportunity to consider taking on this role, one of the things I did is I was doing some research. This idea of Georgia's sort of continuous improvement framework was made aware to me. And on the left column, it's really the sort of the components of the framework that the Georgia Department of Ed sort of created literally over the past 6 to 9 months. I think it was introduced this past summer. In my work around turnaround, we've sort of based on what the research argues, is that really sort of 4 levers. And you can see the alignment between the levers and sort of the Georgia's sort of framework. This idea of the instructional infrastructure, the teaching and learning components, absolutely. The leadership pieces, leadership very broad. When I'm speaking about leadership, part of leadership is engaging others, developing a vision, setting goals, engaging parents and engaging community partners, root cause analysis, looking at really, what are the root causes and why some of these challenges take place. So again, leadership very broad. This idea of talent management. We had a brief conversation around talent management. I think we all appreciate the research is really clear. If you want to improve student outcomes at the school level, the most important variable is the teacher, and the principal is second. This fourth one here is this idea of support and accountability. And what that simply is, it's really about the relationship between schools and the district. I think one of the paradigm shifts that I've tried to help sort of schools and districts sort of think about, you can't look at turnaround as a school-specific challenge. You can't simply ask the principal and teachers at school A, you go and turn yourselves around. The district has a role to play. And that's sort of a little bit of a shift basically from school improvement grants, race to the top, and No Child Left Behind, where it was very school specific. The research argues the district has an important role to play. In the last couple slides here, this idea of launching a partnership. Our partnerships are launched by doing a needs assessment. In fact, we have some of those taking place literally as I speak. And it's really about uncovering what are some of the great things going on at a school and a district, and what are some potential challenges going on at that school and a district. This is sort of a graphic that I oftentimes share. And what I hope people will sort of glean from this is that if you've been doing, the whole insanity conversation, if you've been doing ABC, ABC, ABC for the last 5 or 10 years and you're not happy with the results that you're getting, then you've got to come back and do something different somewhere. There's some things you don't control, but you've got to go back and look at your design, your priorities, your strategies. You've got to go back and do something different. And that's a conversation that we've attempted to have with schools and districts. This idea that all hands on deck, absolutely. Everyone has to play a role in the work. As a part of the work, we will actually help each school and each district create a very concise sort of improvement plan. Very concise, and I emphasize the word concise. One of the things the research really speaks to is that if you ask a school or a district to tackle 2025 initiatives or priorities, nothing's been prioritized. So one of the things we always focus on, what are the 2, 3, or 4 things that over the next sort of 90 days, that if you really dive into those and really try to hit a home run on those 3 or 4 things, it kind of gives you the foundation to do your next set of priorities. At each school or within each district, there will be a transformation specialist. We're still playing around with the title. The House bill speaks of a coach. One of the things we're trying to emphasize with schools and districts is that this coach is not here to judge your work. This coach is not here really even to evaluate in the sense of a negative evaluation. You're not doing A, you're not doing B. The coach there is really a support. These are the things you guys have identified as challenges, and we've helped you identify some of those things. Let's roll up our sleeves together, be partners in the work to really accomplish what you guys identified that you need to accomplish. There's a little conversation about leadership. Again, the research is extremely clear. At the building level, the building principal is an absolutely critical piece. The research is also clear that the central office plays a critical role. So one of the things that we will continually look at is how we can support building principals and leadership teams, and that includes teacher leaders, to really do the great work at the school level. We also want to take a really hard look at the district and what are the conditions at the district level that maybe need to be modified slightly so that schools are capable and those barriers have been removed. Additional benefits from the work. One of the things that the House bill speaks to is that when grants come up from, be it federal grants, state grants, we're actually looking to create a structure and a strategy to ensure that these schools that have been identified, that we really are prioritizing those schools. Resources from the department, just a tremendous network, be it state departments of ed, foundations that we are partnering with and having conversations with and leveraging some of the work that they've already done. And again, I go back and really will close on this idea. It really does take all hands on deck. And that's really the message that we're attempting for everyone to hear, that this really is a partnership and it really is about bringing people together to do this really difficult work. I'll share these 3 points as we have visited districts and superintendents, school boards, and with some principals. There's 3 things that we've heard very consistently. There are lots of opportunities for schools to get support. And their biggest concern is how do we and how do they ensure that all of the different pieces are aligned so that they're not hearing 4 and 5 different voices, they're not hearing different strategies from this group or that person, that all of these pieces are connected. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do, is create a sort of a funnel. You got all of these great opportunities, let's make sure that they're aligned to your priorities. And how do we ensure that there's a single message so that principals and districts are not hearing multiple messages or seeing different initiatives that aren't connected? The second thing that we've heard, as I've walked in, this work is difficult. And whether we want to open up a conversation around funding and equity, we can have that conversation. But what they clearly articulate, and I think I can understand that, is that to do great work, there is a funding aspect, there's a resource aspect. Let me clarify that. Not necessarily a funding aspect, a resource aspect, because everything is not in my mind about more funding, it's about having resources. And some of those resources aren't necessarily dollars. And then the third one, it's sort of this difficult dichotomy between, we've got to do this work immediately, and it takes time. And how do we do both? How do we demonstrate urgency, but also recognize that we've got to be strategic and thoughtful? And that's really hard to do. My nature is a little bit more to kind of go about 80 miles an hour. So I have to purposefully sort of slow down and sort of be thoughtful and strategic about the work that we're doing. Again, it's about a partnership, and it really is about impacting the future of Georgia. Again, this is not about raising test scores. At least that's not the way I look at it. It's much broader, much deeper, much greater than simply raising a few test scores. I'll take some questions. Yes.
I understand you're saying it's a partnership and that all hands on deck are necessary to really create change. But do you think that, at least in certain parts of this state, that the role of public schools are kind of changing? Because it seems like now maybe some schools are expected to do a little bit more than maybe they used to be expected to do. And do they have the resources to do that? And is that fair to expect them, to do that?
Here's how I will answer that. I think if we're going to use the phrase all kids, and it's easy to throw that phrase around, we're going to save all kids and all kids are going to learn. And that sounds really good. If you really mean that, then that means you have to act on that. And I think we all can appreciate that there's some kids, for various reasons, they need a little bit more than some other kids. And if we really are true about doing special things for all kids, then we have to open up the conversation. How do we ensure that all kids have what they need?
But are schools equipped to do that, or do you think?
I think we're helping them become equipped. There's a concept called community learning centers. Probably 10, 12 years ago, this idea of bringing resources to the schoolhouse, resources for parents, resources for students, that concept is not an overly difficult concept. Some of you are familiar with some of the work that's going on with Marietta High School. That concept is really a community learning center. So how in this rural school or this rural district, how can we ensure that we identify resources that are, relatively close, and maybe not, and how do we ensure that kids and families have access to that? Again, some of that's a dollar issue, some of that's simply, let's be strategic about how do we leverage the local university? How do we identify, some sort of vision, mental health, medical care that's maybe 40 miles away? Can we get someone to be here on campus 1 day per week? Again, that's not necessarily an additional dollar amount for the school, but it's a huge investment for those students in that community.
It's not something schools have traditionally done.
That is correct.
Right, so it's a new, I would imagine it's a learning process for a lot of schools of how to engage.
I think one of the things that we're attempting to do, I think we have an incredible opportunity because, again, it's this idea of the academic side and the non-academic side. What we're actually trying to do is sort of create I don't want to say a model, but an approach that's here's maybe how this could look, which I think not only could impact, all of the so-called low-performing schools, but I think we could learn a lot from this initiative that really could impact, really the entire state.
So a quick follow on the healthcare piece of it. Sorry, different technique for miking. Some of the funding for the wraparound healthcare services that already exist in Georgia schools has not been reallocated by the federal government. Community health service money, CHIP funding, those sorts of things. I mean, it's one thing to ask schools to provide this stuff, but when from on high the money has not been reallocated, how can we realistically ask for these enhanced services in schools when even from the highest level the support isn't coming?
And let me provide a little clarification. I don't think this is simply a matter of asking the schools to fund these new pieces. It literally is, how do we engage external partners who have the resource? How do we bring those resources into the schoolhouse? One example would be for many of the kids in some of the schools, any sort of vision, any sort of mental health, any sort of medical support, quite honestly, is at no cost to the student or the family. They just need to have access to that entity relatively close, because quite honestly, because of their financial situation, it won't cost them anything. Okay. So this isn't necessarily about, schools need, some level of additional funding, I think so, but I would really emphasize the concept of resources and not overly focus on the funding aspect of it. I think we need funding to sort of coordinate some of the work, but it's really the resource that's most important.
Whether you acknowledge it or not, politics and education are tied together.
No.
And covering schools for going into my third decade now, and this is a variation on an ongoing theme. How are you going to take all of this in a climate that changes every 4 to 8 years and actually do something? I mean, how are you navigating that?
That's a great question. So I'm going to be very political on how I answer that. I think the fact that there's some legislation that speaks to the work, I think there's some power in the legislation. So this is not simply an initiative, a project that, someone's sort of putting together. I mean, there's some legislation that drives the work. So I think that's most important. I think we also have an opportunity to demonstrate the value of the work. And I think, quite honestly, some of that's going to be my responsibility to demonstrate the value of the work. I would say the third component to this is, and it goes back to the earlier conversation about if we're really serious about all kids, then we actually have to do something about it. And again, going back to that diagram, if we've been doing ABC for the last whatever number of years and we're not happy with the results that we've gotten, then we have to go back and do something different. This is something different.
Okay, just a quick follow-up. These need surveys, are you doing that across all 162 or 3 districts, or just those districts that have been identified as having turnaround schools or eligible?
At the moment, it's actually a small subset of schools from 5 districts.
Okay. Did you say that you're going to be doing a needs assessment for all districts?
Yeah, the vision is that obviously the timing, you know, we're in December, January, so the timing to really sort of launch this work is a little bit odd in the middle of the year. So we identified a set of schools coming from 5 school districts, Bibb County, Dougherty County, Clay County, Randolph County, and Dooley County. Very intentional. And then this spring, the vision is to identify another set of schools. Again, not exactly sure where those schools or districts will come from yet, but will be in sort of a cohort 2 in preparation for next year.
Dr. Thomas, just following up on that, could you explain why those were the 5 that you chose? And then more broadly, could you also explain of the 100 or so schools that were eligible to be in your purview, why did you choose the ones that you did? And what does it mean for the ones that were eligible but not chosen now? Are they just like all the ones that weren't eligible, or are they sort of to be gotten later? Can you explain that?
Absolutely. I will attempt to explain some of the criteria. There was not an absolute formula. What we did was we looked at just an incredible amount of data, quite honestly some of the data that Dana shared regarding some of the health, mental health pieces in rural Georgia. We looked at some of that data, quite honestly. There were 27 districts that are represented on the so-called turnaround eligible list. So we actually looked at all 27 districts, and as we continued to look at various pieces of data, whether it was mental health data, homelessness data, God, it just seemed it became more and more obvious day by day. It makes sense to be working in this area. We looked at test scores, we looked at CCRPI, we looked at the trend. So just because you're at a 50 this year, if you've been trending in the right direction, that means you're doing not okay, but you're moving in the right direction. Maybe you don't need us to focus immediately. We had conversations with superintendents in school boards, and to be very transparent, you know, for this first cohort, we really wanted, you know, this concept of a partnership. So as we had conversations, if there was a superintendent or a school board who, you know, sort of pushed back a little bit, you know, my little saying is I'm not going to force anyone to marry us yet. So some of those sort of conversations took place. So there were a lot of different pieces that went into how we ultimately came up with those particular districts and those particular schools.
And what about the ones who were eligible but were not chosen? What does that mean now? Or are they just lumped in with all the others that weren't even on the list?
There's a little bit of a quasi approach to that, and myself and Stephanie Johnson, we're actually sort of working together to figure out sort of what to do with those schools, particularly for the rest of this year. We're going to spend the next 3 or 4 months sort of creating a strategy for moving forward, but you know, we've got about 4 months. So there's a little bit of a quasi approach. One approach is some of those schools, quite honestly, for various reasons, they're simply going to sort of be supported by the school improvement division. There's going to be another set of schools that are, you know, sort of getting a little bit of our support, potentially in preparation for them getting an additional level or higher support, greater support starting this spring. So there's a couple different versions to what that looks like at the moment. I think long term, what we really want to be able to do is to create a little bit more of a differentiated structure and strategy. You're in sort of the turnaround work, sort of really at this work. There's maybe a slightly less version of this, and then maybe a third side of it is your, you know, part of the school improvement division's work.
So some of the schools you actually might be contacting later on this year.
Absolutely.
Completely off the hook.
I wouldn't say completely off the hook necessarily. I wouldn't use that phrasing. But yes, there's some schools, again, there were 104 schools. The idea of trying to tackle 104 schools at any single point in time, I think we can appreciate that idea of being urgent and being strategic. And we're trying to be strategic.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
A lot of what you've been talking about is the carrot approach, but how important is it when we look at some of the schools that are falling off of the need to improve list, in the Atlanta district, for example, how important is it that these schools can see what's the writing on the wall, that there is somebody there, and there are some that sticks original eventually, you know, if they don't improve? How important is it to have that presence as well?
I think it goes back to this idea of sort of all hands on deck and this idea of a partnership. So if you've got a school district and they believe that they're doing tremendous work, let's look at what the data says, And quite honestly, if you're trending in the right direction, I think we all can appreciate, to some extent, let them continue to do their fantastic work. If you've got a school district that, based on what the data is saying, things are not moving in the right direction, we're going to give you a certain level of support, or attempt to, and you're not really very receptive of that support, and the data says you really should be taking this support, yes, that conversation sounds a little different.
We have time for one more question before we need to break.
The House Rural Development Council has floated this idea of providing grant funding for coastal education. What are your thoughts on that, and do you see that as one of your areas of greatest need?
Clarify that one more time. I just didn't hear you.
It's one of the recommendations from the House Rural Development Council to provide grant funding for character education in rural schools. What do you think about that idea, and do you see that as one of your areas of greatest need?
I think it just depends on how we look at character education. If we're simply talking about sort of a student discipline sort of perspective on it, if a school or if a district, based on their needs assessment, if that is lifted up as one of their priorities or challenges, absolutely. I think we always, at least I believe, we always have to be very conscious of not just putting a program, not just, quite honestly, even giving a grant if they don't need that. So I think it's really, what does the needs assessment of those schools and the district say? And maybe even greater, how do we clarify character education? What does that actually mean? Because there's multiple components of what that could look like.
One last question? Sorry. Just one quick follow-up. So you talked about how you're assessing schools for the school's particular needs right now. Is there also within your purview an economic assessment of the surrounding communities going on, so you can get an idea of what other resources can come to bear in the schools? And what is that looking like, that assessment?
There's a concept called asset mapping. So what we're attempting to do, once we identify a school or school district that, boy, this is a school or district that we need to support, let's identify all of the assets that are available in that community. And how do we leverage those assets to close whatever gaps, to close whatever priorities, or to address whatever priorities that the needs assessments bring out? How do we create partners based on what the needs assessment says?